Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blank and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC television podcast brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Chad Bryce, and this is my first ever podcast. I know. I'm just as excited as you. Thanks for joining me. It's been a really long year for most of us. If you're like me, you've probably been in quarantine for a while. You've probably been watching lots of television. I've actually been furloughed since March, so spent a fair amount of time watching TV, and I've officially become a cord cutter. Went from having cable and internet to having 5 or 6 different subscriptions to different streaming sites. I didn't intend to have 5 or 6 subscriptions to different streaming sites, but it just kind of happened. So most of what I watch is on either HBO Max, Disney Plus, which I absolutely love, Hulu, Netflix, and there's another one that's escaping me right now. And so today I wanted to talk about 4 of the shows that have been keeping me entertained during quarantine. The first is a brand new network show on NBC. It's a half-hour comedy brought to us by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson called The Young Rock. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my personal favorite shows on television. It is a guilty pleasure that I stumbled into about 10 years ago, The Bachelor, and all things Bachelor franchise. Going to talk a little bit about a new Netflix show called Tribes of Europa. And then at the end, you'll want to stick around until the end because we are going to talk about The Muppet Show and the fact that it is streaming finally on Disney Plus. So looking forward to that. Why don't we go ahead and get started? We're going to go right off the top here with the new show, Young Rock. Now, I don't know if you watched the Macy's Thanksgiving Parade, but as I sat and watched that with my family, I saw something I hadn't seen before. They had a giant balloon float in the shape of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Hip pack, blue jeans, just kind of carrying through the streets of New York. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And before going to the commercial break, the announcer just mentioned that was to advertise the new NBC show. I had no idea when it was going to come out, but as I was flipping through Hulu the other day, I came across it and decided to give it a try. So Young Rock, it's a new half-hour comedy. It airs Monday nights on NBC. I'm a fan of The Rock. Huge fan. I wouldn't say that I've seen everything he's done. I certainly never watched him when he wrestled because I prefer not to watch WWE or WWF. But I certainly have been noticing a lot of the things he's been doing as an entrepreneur. He has a tequila line called Tremana that I tried just the other day and really enjoyed. And, you know, he's apparently lived a very eventful life. He started kind of humble beginnings, growing up in Hawaii, and now he's kind of blossomed into this entrepreneur. He's got an ownership stake in the XFL, several successful movies and television series under his belt, like Ballers, which he did on HBO. And he's apparently in interviews compared his life experiences to the movie Forrest Gump. And it appears that rather than writing an autobiography, which, you know, is pretty popular nowadays, he's chosen to tell his story in the format of a half-hour comedy. And so Young Rock is that story. So it stars Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He plays himself, and it's based on situations and lessons that he learned or experienced throughout his life. He tells the story through the lens of himself, Dwayne Johnson, as a presidential candidate in 2032. So the premiere episode begins with him sitting for interviews with reporters and talking about his life and background, and he's doing that to dispel this publicly held belief that his fame makes him unable to connect with real life struggles of everyday Americans. In response to the reporter's first question, he kind of begins to share these stories from his less than glamorous childhood. Now, the events in this series, I really kind of like the way the story's told. It's focused on 3 different time periods in his life. 1982, when he was 10 years old. 1987, when he was 15. And 1990, when he was 18 years old. And there's 3 different actors that are portraying Johnson in all 3 of the different ages. And the action moves kind of seamlessly through the different time periods with each shared anecdote. And all of the stories and anecdotes that he tells supports the episode's kind of main theme. So the theme for the episode 1, is working the gimmick, something that the People's Champion certainly knows something about, as his own gimmicks have been masterfully managed over the years. I don't watch wrestling, like I said. I've never seen one of his matches, but I do find myself saying quite often, "Can you smell what the Rock is cooking?" every time I make dinner. Which my family absolutely loves, I'm sure. So the first story of the episode gives us a glimpse into his world as the 10-year-old son of his semi-professional wrestling star father, Rocky Soul Man Johnson. You know, right off the bat, his relationship with some of the greats of wrestling is established. There's this scene where his family goes to dinner at his uncle's house, and sitting around the table and in the living room are some of the great wrestlers of all time. We see the Junkyard Dog, we see Andre the Giant, the Wild Samoans, the Iron Sheik, and we're even introduced to his grandmother, who was a wrestler as well, Leah Maivia. And so no time's wasted kind of addressing the common perception that professional wrestling is a fake sport. During this scene, you've got all these wrestlers sitting around and they're talking, and young Dwayne Johnson makes a comment about not understanding what the big deal is, because, you know, everybody knows wrestling is fake, and it prompts this kind of immediate E.F. Hutton silence moment as everyone turns to look at him. And then after a brief pause, Andre the Giant gets up and picks the boy up and raises him as high into the air as possible, and makes it very clear to him in that moment that wrestling is fake is not something he should ever say. again in his life. And of course, as any young, 10-year-old kid being raised in the air by a giant, Dwayne got the hint. It was really kind of a funny moment. So as we transition from this dinner scene where he's telling his first story about, kind of his background and the people who he learned from and how gimmicks were important in their life, we transition into the second story set at age 15. We see a young Dwayne Johnson who's now trying to figure out how to fit in. He comes from very humble beginnings, doesn't have a lot of money, and so the scene kind of starts with him stealing from a department store these clothes that he wanted to wear so that he could impress a girl. Isn't it appropriate? Everything silly that guys do, it tends to have a love interest behind it. So he's no different. And as the story continues, you kind of get the sense that he's kind of stuck between these two worlds. He's proud of his family. He loves his family. He's proud of who he comes from, but he's not proud of where he comes from, and he's desperately wanting to have some of those finer things in life, like actual Coca-Cola in the refrigerator as opposed to kind of the off-brand cola. And he's sharing these feelings with his mother, and it kind of starts to give a look into the relationship that he has with his mom. As being someone that he can confide in and really have these conversations that he's not really able to have with his father in the same way. And as the story progresses, it turns out that he's actually expanding on a story he first shared in an interview in 2013 while he was doing press for the Fast and the Furious. And that's the story of his first car, which he purchased off a drug addict for the ridiculously low sum of $70. Now in the show, he doesn't pay $70. He actually pays $103. But upon receiving the keys, he's driving down the road and he discovers that there's another addict asleep in the back seat. And so while in real life he pulled over the car and immediately had the guy get out, in the show that guy actually sticks around for a little while, and he spends time with him, and he actually learns a life lesson. He's on his way to a party when he discovers the guy's asleep in his back seat, and as they're driving to the party, the guy's listening to the conversation that he and his friend is having, and before entering the party, the addict from the back seat, known as Waffle, shares with him a piece of advice, and that advice is that it's more important for him to support and help his family than to impress other people, which is why he wanted the car in the first place. And he literally was going to this party. Meanwhile, he knew that his mother was getting off work soon and would be sitting at the bus stop waiting for the bus. And so he takes this kind of life lesson, this nugget of wisdom, and he thinks on it, and he decides to leave the party and go pick up his mom. And when he picks her up, she's kind of confused as to where he got the car. And he explains that it's their car, and that he intends to use it to provide transportation for both he and his mom, since his dad uses the family's one car primarily. In the scene, his mom talks about her dream of owning her own car, specifically a red Cadillac. And as it turns out, later in life, when Dwayne Johnson becomes more established, one of the gifts that he bought for his mother was a red Cadillac. So I thought that was kind of a cool way to weave in something from his life that he ended up actually bringing to fruition with his mother, and it just served to really kind of, for me, reinforce this relationship and who his mother was in his life. Now, the third story, and the final one in the episode, it's set in 1990. When he's just starting college, he had been recruited to play football at the University of Miami. And his introduction to the team gets off to a rocky start thanks to his dad, who made a point to visit the university in advance of his arrival and spin this story about his son having landed a featured spot on the front of a Wheaties box. But he doesn't tell his son that, and so he's kind of caught.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Telling the truth. And so he has to find a way to kind of get beyond that and establish himself with the team. And he notices that there's this board that has bench press records for the team. And he goes out and he decides he's going to try to break the bench press record, which was 35 bench presses at 225 pounds. And so he goes out and he starts pressing the weight and ends up doing 36. And the team is surprised and celebrates. And we're meant to understand that he's now got his own kind of identity within this team, and all is well. Overall, I feel like Young Rock is a wonderfully executed family show. The messages are relevant, wholesome. They're presented in a way that I felt was very entertaining and clear enough for an audience to understand regardless of age. So I highly recommend checking that out. If you don't have cable, you can watch it on Hulu. And if you do have cable, it's Monday nights, 7 o'clock Central. Check it out. All right, we are going to take a quick break. But I really, 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 really hope that you will stick around, come back after the break, because we are going to go into my favorite part of the show, my conversation, or my chance to share with you what happened on this last episode of The Bachelor, Bachelor Hometowns. All right, welcome back. Thank you for sticking around. You know, we all have our guilty pleasures. For me, The Bachelor is a guilty pleasure. It's interesting. I 10 years ago was sitting on my couch. I lived alone. I was flipping through channels on a Monday night, and I happened to stumble on this show called The Bachelor. I'd never heard about it, didn't know what it was, but it just happened to be starting right at that moment. And so I decided, you know what, I'll watch a few minutes, and then I'll keep going, find something else if I'm not interested. That one decision has spawned an obsession with all things Bachelor Nation. for many, many years. And it's funny because as I was talking to some friends about this show that I had discovered, I found out that one of my really close friends, Courtney, also watched the show. And so we began kind of our own tradition of getting together on Monday nights. I would make spaghetti, we'd get a bottle of wine, and we'd sit and we watch The Bachelor, and we would talk about all of the contestants on this ridiculous show that both of us were addicted to. And over the years, even though I've moved away and she's moved away, and, all different kind of points in our life, we continue to connect via text about The Bachelor. I've gotten coworkers addicted to it. I have a fantasy league. I mean, it's gotten a little crazy, not gonna lie. But this season's been a little different. People who know the franchise are familiar with the fact that the host, Chris Harrison, asserts every season that it will be the most dramatic season ever. And there are times when it is, and there are times when it isn't. And I have to admit that most of the time it's true. As each season finds a way to bring some new twist. This season, the twist happened to have occurred off screen, and encompasses a lot of very relevant social challenges to our time. So before I get into the full recap of this week, I want to give a really brief breakdown of the season. So this is the second season that was filmed during the pandemic. The Bachelor cast was announced during the summer of 2020, shortly after the protests began in support of George Floyd. The casting announcement was significant because this season's Bachelor was the first black man selected to be the Bachelor in the 25-year history of the show. Also groundbreaking was the fact that for the first time in 25 seasons, the Bachelor was someone who was new to the franchise. Typically they go and they find, someone who was popular on the previous season of Bachelorette, and they select them to be the Bachelor. But they didn't do that this time. In fact, Matt James is a friend, roommate of a former Bachelorette contestant, but he's never actually been associated with the show. This is also only the second time, third time due to a little kind of twist in last season's The Bachelorette, but it's really the first time that they've had a lead of color on The Bachelor. They've had a black Bachelorette with Rachel Lindsay 3 or 4 years ago. They had a second black Bachelorette that stepped in, a young lady named Tasha, after last season's Bachelorette decided she found love after just 3 weeks and left the show, and they kind of scrambled to get somebody else in, and Tasha was the selection. But this is significant. The show continues to tout itself as a way for normal people to find love. And yet the participants in the show really don't represent the ever-evolving racial demographics of America, which is, part of what made this season significant. So a couple weeks ago, images of surfaced on social media that one of the contestants, one of the remaining 4 that we'll be talking about in just a few moments, Rachel K., she was, some pictures were posted online where she was at a antebellum party in 2018 when she was in college. And of course, this sparked understandable backlash and controversy given kind of the racist undertones inherent in that type of party. And so, as a spokesman for the franchise, the host, Chris Harrison, went on E! News and spoke with Rachel Lindsay, the former Bachelorette and first and only woman of color in that role prior to last season's replacement with Tasha. And Rachel just happens to have recently gotten a job with E! News, and she asked him very pointedly about the controversy that was brewing. His response was very, very swift, very tone deaf, and reeked of privilege. And it sparked even more outrage on social media, and there was a campaign to remove him from the show, and Chris immediately apologized, and it was several days later that he went on to make a larger statement that he was going to be stepping away from the show, would not be part of the live show after the final rose, which takes place after the Bachelor picks who he wants to marry, and it remains to be seen if and when Chris Harrison will return to the show. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people who couldn't care less about this controversy, or this show for that matter. But there's tens of thousands of people that do watch this. I think one of the great things about guilty pleasure television is kind of this ability to just disconnect and enjoy. And so when one of these kind of very real life situations comes up, it is very interesting to me how it can impact not just the show itself, but kind of the engagement around that show. And so something that I will be tuning in to kind of keep seeing as it ever involves. But yeah, so I felt like we should start this recap, just giving you a little brief history of something that happened kind of off screen, that has made this a very memorable, and in some ways, I'm not going to say groundbreaking, I don't think that's the right word, but a very memorable season. Okay, so we're gonna pause that. We're gonna talk about the most latest episode. Now, for people who do not watch the show, basically, here's how it works. Okay, they select a man, in this case Matt James, and he typically would be standing in a driveway outside a mansion in the California hills, and limos of women would come to meet him, and then he would date them for multiple weeks and whittle it down from 30 approximate women to one, and that last one is the one that he loves and he proposes to, and in theory they live happily ever after. Well, COVID protocols, of course, have shifted things this season, so they're not using the mansion, which is actually a private family home. And they've decided to hold this season at a resort, where they're able to create kind of a bubble, much like the NBA did, so they could do their season during COVID, where basically they quarantine everybody. There's constant testing regimens. Nobody's kind of going in and out, and all of the contestants are able to kind of have their own rooms and stuff like that in case they need to. So everything's taking place on this resort, as opposed to the traditional kind of globe-trotting trips and all of that. So we've reached the point in the season where the Bachelor is now down to 4 remaining women. And when he gets down to 4 women, typically on the show, you have the hometown dates, where the Bachelor goes with each of those women to their individual hometowns, and the women get to plan their own date. That's meant to give the Bachelor kind of a snapshot into their life, what life would be like with them. And then it always ends with dinner with the family, so the Bachelor can meet them and in most cases ask the father if they were to get to that point at the end of the show, would he be okay if he asks his daughter to marry them. So all very fun. Because of COVID, the travel aspect is not possible. So all of the dates are taking place on this resort. And that, personally, I'm not a big fan. I really like the hometown dates. I love the change of scenery. There's something very calming about it. It seems like the women, for the contestants, it seems like the women are able to relax differently in their hometowns. But like everybody else, they're doing the best they can. So instead of going to their hometown, they're kind of trying to plan dates on the resort that encompass some aspect of their hometown. And so the first date of the week, because all 4 of these dates kind of take place in a 7 to 8 day period, the first day of the week is with a young woman named Michelle. She's a 27-year-old teacher from Minnesota, and Michelle was one of the 5 late arrivals to the show. So there's always these little twists and turns. Night 1, 30 women came to meet him. 5 or 6 got eliminated right off the bat, and then 3 weeks in, the producers decided that because of the overwhelming interest of women wanting to date Matt, that they were going to throw a curveball and add 5 more women to the mix. That, as you would expect, did not go over well with the women who were already there, but of those women, Michelle's one of the only ones that still remains of the 5 latecomers, and so she's doing her hometown date. So she decides to take Matt on a bike ride through the woods. She mentioned...
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And they ride to a conference center on the resort where they've set up a Zoom call with all of the kids from Michelle's classroom. The students get to meet Matt, and they ask him questions, and Matt gets to see the relationship that Michelle has with her kids. This date is a hit with Matt. You can see it all over his face. He himself has a charity he works with to encourage healthy eating and activity amongst inner city kids. And so, getting to meet her kids and see her interact with the kids, like it's a home run. So they finish the Zoom call, and then it's time for them to go and have dinner, where Matt gets to meet Michelle's mother and father. Now, whenever they're meeting the parents, there's always kind of these breakaways where each parent meets or sits down with the individual, gets to ask them questions. They sit down with their own daughter, get to ask her questions, because they're trying to kind of feel out what's going on. This went really, really, really well by comparison to some of the hometowns that I've seen. Of course, Michelle's parents were a little concerned that things may be moving too fast. Michelle, very intelligent woman, very, very clear in her feelings for Matt, and just says, look, I get it. I know that this seems to be moving fast, but if there wasn't potential here, I wouldn't still be here, kind of thing. And that seems to satisfy her mom, who had kind of expressed the concern. And so the date ends. The date ends with Michelle professing to Matt that she is beginning to fall in love with him. And he doesn't reciprocate in the moment. They don't often do. You still got 3 other women you're dating, so bachelors are usually pretty guarded against using the L word, but certainly he does express his appreciation for that, and it seems through the interaction that the feelings are there on both sides of the coin. Okay, so we are going to take a quick break once again. Please don't go anywhere. When we come back, I'm going to finish my recap of the Bachelor hometown dates. We're going to talk about Tribes of Europa, the new show on Netflix. And please, please, please stick around to the end. We're going to talk about one of my favorite shows as a child, The Muppet Show. And we're going to go over my top 10 episodes of the 5 seasons currently streaming on Disney+. Stick around. All right, welcome back. Okay, we're going to finish off this recap of the Bachelor hometowns, starting with date number 2. So next up we have Rachel, who's 24. She's from Georgia. She has been a front runner for weeks. Their attraction to each other very apparent every time they're on screen together. And for her date, she decides to take Matt for a good old leap of faith style date, and they go skydiving. So they suit up, and they're tandem jumping with an instructor, and the experience is going really, really well. You've got tons of shaky GoPro camera shots. Anyone who's afraid of heights, like myself, may find those a little hard to watch, but certainly there were tons of them. And Matt, he lands first. Landing's great, super uneventful, and he's watching as Rachel continues her descent, and at the last minute it looks like there's some kind of like a wind shear or a change of direction, and she ends up landing hard, like grass to the face, disheveled hair, very, very hard. And so it appears as though they may have had to cut filming after her landing, so that she could get checked out by medics, because when we come back, there's kind of this jump cut, and she's been kind of fixed up, cleaned up, hair's not disheveled anymore, and long story, she's okay. So they finish their skydiving, and they go to meet her family. She has her mom and her father and her sister there, and during this date, we start to see some of the usual kind of hesitancy from the fathers, that, he's not really sure about this whole process. He expresses reservations to Matt that, he's dating all of these other women, and how can he really be committed to or care about his daughter, Rachel? And it's in this moment that Matt kind of throws caution to the wind and is very direct with her father, and tells him that he is falling in love with his daughter, Rachel. And so at the end of the date, Rachel has already shared similar feelings with Matt, and so by all standards, the date was really successful. And it sets up the next date with Bree. Now, Bree is 24. She's from San Francisco, And she had recently told Matt that she had to resign from her job to continue being there to date him. And that she did that because she really believed that they had a connection. No pressure. No pressure on Matt, I'm sure. Bree is someone that Matt has really been interested in since day one. She got the first one-on-one date of the season. Matt took her out four-wheeling in the woods. They had a great time. And after four-wheeling, they got into an outdoor hot tub, had champagne, made out, all the cool parts of the date. And so Bree decides to relive that magic from the first date. And this time she's in the driver's seat, and she's driving this, she's taking him off-roading in a lime green Jeep. They drive around, they get the car full of mud, then they stop and they have a picnic. And during the picnic, it's really an opportunity for them to kind of talk and continue to kind of deepen this relationship. And she shares with him that she's very nervous about him meeting her family. Matt acknowledges that he's also nervous, and part of his nervousness comes from the idea that, for him, he feels like her family's really showing up for her, and he wants to make sure he's putting his best foot forward. And so they finish their picnic, they go off, and they're meeting Bree's mom. They're meeting Bree's friend, who's also named Bree, and Bree's baby sister. And I do mean baby, like infant sister. During Matt's time with Bree's mom, he shares that they connected over their shared experiences growing up as only children of single mothers. But he doesn't in that conversation share anything with her about whether or not he's in love with Bree. Bree does, however, let him know that evening that she is falling in love with him. So whether or not him not expressing those feelings in the moment with Bree or her mom is a bad sign remains to be seen. So then we have one more date. The last date, it belongs to the fourth and final young woman, a woman named Serena P. Serena is 22. She's from Canada, and she plans this kind of fun Canadian immersion date, complete with Canadian slang trivia games, poutine, which is a classic Canadian dish of French fries that have been fried in duck fat, topped with cheese curds and gravy. I'm kind of a foodie. Poutine is one of my favorite foods. I was a little bit appalled by the fact that when Matt asked if he should use a fork to consume the plate of deliciousness, she said that he could, but that she normally uses her fingers, and then proceeded to pick up one fry from the outskirts of the plate and eat it. Look, if you haven't had poutine, please trust me when I say this is not a dish to be eaten with your fingers, because you got to get that perfect bite of fries, cheese, gravy in every bite, a task which is not as elegantly accomplished with one's fingers. Anyway, I sorry. Food, I love it. Poutine, one of my faves. Let me get back on track. The date ends with them playing a nice quick ice hockey scrimmage because, she's Canadian. You can't have Canada without ice hockey. And then they go off to meet Serena's mom, dad, and sister. Unlike his previous 3 dates, his time with the family does not go smoothly. Serena's sister expresses concern to Serena that she feels something's missing between her sister and Matt. As the night progresses, Serena continues to seem more and more confused as to where she stands with her feelings for Matt. When the night ends, we see them just kind of awkwardly saying goodbye, and then we cut to the next day where Matt's meeting with Chris Harrison to discuss how his dates went, and he shares with them the fact that, even though he has feelings for Serena, he's really not sure kind of where they stand. Chris, in his role, he encourages Matt to go to her, to have a conversation, talk it out, figure it out, because we're getting down to the wire here. And at the end of the day, he's got to pick 3 women that he's going to continue on this journey with. And so he does. He goes to meet Serena at her room in the resort, and that conversation does not go well at all. She ultimately ends up telling him that while she does care for him, he's not her person. Matt is shocked and speechless and not really sure what to say, but it's very clear the conversation did not go as he expected. But Matt, being Matt, he thanks her for her honesty, and she walks him out, and they say goodbye, and Serena essentially eliminates herself from the competition. So the episode Hometown Dates, they end with a rose ceremony. 3 remaining women are left standing there in a room, whispering to one another, unsure where Serena is, as she's not yet arrived for the rose ceremony. And eventually Matt comes in, and he shares that Serena decided to leave. But you can tell in the moment he's clearly shook by the results of his conversation with Serena, so much so that he implores the remaining women that when he calls their name before they accept a rose, and all of them are getting a rose since there's only 3 left and he has 3 roses, they're all going on to next week, but he asks them before they accept it to really think about whether or not they're in this, like how, that they really do care for him. And so he calls them up, he gives them the rose, everybody accepts, and they're moving on to next week, which is Fantasy Suites Week. So you'll have to stay tuned to hear how that goes. Fantasy Suites Week is always really cool because it's the first opportunity for the Bachelor and the young women to kind of have some alone time without cameras and sound guys standing around in a room they call the Fantasy Suite. So we'll recap that next week because I love the Bachelor. Okay, I want to talk really briefly about a show that I literally stumbled on recently. It's a new show on Netflix. It's in the top 10 most viewed shows on Netflix for this week. It's a German show that's been dubbed into English called Tribes of Europa. Look, we're going through a pandemic. I've been kind of avoiding those post-apocalyptic shows that I usually enjoy watching, but this one is really kind of interesting. It caught my attention. The show is set in the year 2070 after a blackout in 2029 basically reset the clock on civilization and put everyone back into the dark age. Broken into factions of people, these small communities that are kind of living in this post-apocalyptic world, vying for control of the European continent. And we start the episode with 3 kids, their siblings, Kino, Liv, and Ilya, and they are out hunting. Ilya has just killed a wolf. It's, as we will soon learn, is part of a rite of passage ceremony for the people of their tribe. When they hit the age of 16, they kill a wolf, and they're branded, and they step into adulthood as a full member of society and able to contribute to protecting and providing for the tribe. Their tribe is the Origines. It's a small tribe, about 50 people. It was started by their mother years before. And while they're kind of wrapping up this hunt, there's this loud explosion, and they see something they've never seen before. It's this flying craft. A ship comes flying overhead and crash lands in the forest nearby. These are people who have no technology. They're literally back to hunting and gathering with bows and arrows and primitive weapons. And so this ship flying through the air came as quite a shock, and they have this brief dialogue around should they go check it out, should they go back and tell their leader, their father, and so they decide, no, we're going to go back, we're going to tell Dad, he'll decide what to do about this. And so they go back to the tribe, they talk to the dad. Dad says, absolutely not, we're not going, we need to stick to ourselves, that's our way. We're not going to go and investigate this crash. And so the kids are disappointed by that. And after some more discussion, Dad kind of sleeps on it, decides the next day, let's go check it out. So they go out and they discover what is a ship from another tribe called the Atlanteans. Now, the Atlanteans, for whatever reason, they still have access to technology. They're very technologically superior. So while exploring the wreckage, the youngest son finds a black metal cube. They haven't found the pilot. They're not sure how the plane got shot down, where the pilot is, but the son finds the cube, Elia, and he decides to hide it. He doesn't tell anybody that he found it. And so they split up. The father and one other man go off to Little Prava, a nearby community that they trade with quite often, to just see if they've known anything or if they found the pilot. And the kids all go back to their home. And Elia decides to take a little detour, and he ends up going to this underground, it almost looks like a train station entrance, where you can see he's amassed this kind of collection of relics from the world before the blackout. And in this kind of collection, he adds the cube, and as he turns to leave, he hears a noise and finds the Atlantean pilot has crawled into this space and is hiding there. And he in fact asks him about the cube and expresses that he needs to find it. He's badly injured. Ilya goes back to the tribe to get medical supplies, but doesn't tell the pilot that he found the cube. And while he's gathering the supplies, his sister notices him and insists that he tell him or her what's going on, and he shares that he found the pilot. And so Ilya and his sister Liv and his brother, they go off to check on this pilot to render aid. Now, these people are basically cut off from the other tribes. They prefer it that way. It's safer. But they decide in this moment to take the pilot back to their tribe to render medical assistance. This does not go over well. People are obviously concerned. And as we very quickly learn, there's a rival group known as the Crows. They're kind of the villain in the series that's also looking for this Atlantean pilot, and they are a very kind of ruthless, deadly group of warring individuals that may or may not use some sort of like gas or drug to kind of hype them up. And so it doesn't take long before the crows show up at their doorstep looking for this pilot and his Atlantean cube, because they want to steal this technology, which will give them these, in their belief, the power to kind of rule all of Europa. The crows are merciless. I mean, they come on this community and just start murdering everybody. And the Atlantean, or Elia shares with the Atlantean that he has his cube, and the Atlantean's like, look, it's too late. I can't do what I need to do. The cube is a message. There's something really bad coming. I need you to take this cube to my people and get the message to them, kind of thing. And so Elia, in a panic, runs off into the woods with the cube, crows on his tail, trying to get him, because they know that he has it now, and we see him eventually kind of escape into the forest. And while he's escaping, his sister is struck down while fighting one of the crows. His brother and father and some remaining members of the group are kind of taken hostage and questioned as to what happened to the cube. And all of them don't really know. The only one that knows that the youngest son has the cube in the first place is his older brother, who's not telling the crows that his little brother has it and is running off through the woods somewhere. And so the crows, having not gotten the information they want, to continue their search for the cube and take the remaining members of the Origines tribe to their community to serve as slaves. That's kind of where the episode ends, is with the tribe being destroyed, and the crows capturing them and taking them back to their home base of sorts. The show is fun. I've watched a couple more episodes, which I'll recap in later podcasts. The show's fun. It creates a very interesting world. It's immersive. Dubbed shows can sometimes be a bit bothersome. I always hate when you dub a show, but the voices don't seem to match kind of the characters. And this one, I think, was done really, really well. You can kind of tell that it was dubbed, but not really. And I found the production quality and everything to be really, really good. It's a show that I'm enjoying. And for those of you that like to binge, it's a 6-episode series. Super fast, easy to get in, watch it all, and be done. So I highly recommend Tribes of Europa on Netflix. All right, we are going to take our last break. When we come back, we're going to talk about The Muppet Show on Disney and my top 10 favorite episodes. Don't go away. All right, welcome back. We are on the home stretch. Going to spend a few minutes talking about what was one of my favorite shows as a child, The Muppet Show. The Muppet Show is now streaming on Disney Plus. And I don't know about you guys, but as a kid, like, The Muppet Show was one of those shows that I watched with my dad, and I had all of the dolls. Like, I had a Scooter doll and a Kermit doll. I had a Little Miss Piggy. You name it, I had it. I was a spoiled kid, really spoiled kid. For those who maybe are a little bit younger, haven't seen The Muppet Show, it's a show that came about after Jim Henson experienced success with another popular children's show, Sesame Street. Sesame Street, still on the air today, and after having great success with that, he wanted to kind of prove that he could create a show with a broader, more adult appeal. The result was The Muppet Show. It was a live-action variety show that featured lovable Muppet favorites like Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, Gonzo, Fozzie the Bear, Waka Waka Waka, and Scooter. The first episode aired on September 5th, 1976. And it enjoyed a fairly remarkable success. Lasted 5 seasons. Last episode aired on the 15th of March, 1981. What's most interesting, though, is it didn't end there. The Muppet Show served as kind of an entry point to a much larger franchise. It spawned 13 feature films, multiple series spin-offs, most notably The Muppets, Muppets Tonight, and The Muppet Babies, which is an animated series that's still in production today. In total, there were 120 episodes of The Muppet Show produced, and of the 120, 118 of those are available to stream for the first time ever. Now, if you're a diehard fan, you're going to notice that there's been some edits to several of the episodes, and that there's 2 episodes that are missing entirely. Most of the edits are due to issues with securing music rights to the songs that were originally featured in the episodes. This apparently has been an ongoing challenge, and it's the primary reason it's taken so long for the series to be available. When it comes to the 2 missing episodes, both of those episodes are from season 5. One of them featured Brooke Shields as a guest star, and it was withheld entirely because they couldn't secure the music rights for any of the songs in that episode. But the other missing episode is believed to have been omitted because one of the guest stars, a man named Chris Langham, he was a writer on the show. He ended up stepping into the guest star spot last minute after Richard Pryor dropped out. He apparently ran into some legal trouble, was convicted for possessing child pornography in 2007. And so, for obvious reasons, Disney opted to not include his episode. Another thing that viewers are going to notice is that there's several episodes that feature warnings at the beginning of the episode. This warning was inserted to address negative cultural depictions and stereotypes that are present in the episode, and it acknowledges the fact that they were just as wrong at the time of filming as they are today. Some examples of this is like there was one episode that featured Johnny Cash, and he's performing in front of both the U.S. flag and the Confederate battle flag. There's one where folk singer Joan Baez speaks with an Indian accent. And then there was another episode where Kenny Rogers is dressed in Arab attire while drilling for oil, just to kind of give you an example of some of the reasons or some of the scenes that they wanted to warn people about. So other than that, all the episodes are there. I gotta tell you, I haven't watched all 5 seasons yet. I've been kind of jumping around. It has been so fun to be able to see this show again. I have such fond memories, some of which I didn't even think about until I started watching it, and it was like I was flooded back to times